Hi everyone. This is the time of year we celebrate Earth Day. This year's theme is the Restore the Earth. It's the 51st anniversary, and we have been quite fortunate to be able to assemble a whole series of speakers, eminent speakers, to bring forward some of these messages. The themes we are going to be looking at is climate action involving youth, the biodiversity of Bukit Kera, which is of course very important to Friends of Bukit Kera. Looking at community action and what we can do to save green lungs. And finally looking at the whole issue of climate emergency and the kind of efforts which are going on in the country for restoration. The fact that you're here means you care, which is fantastic. So we'd like very much for you to take the next logical step. Come and join us in FOBK. All the Green Lung organizations you are in contact with so that you can start to make a difference with us. And you can become citizen scientists, volunteer your services, or very importantly help to raise funds so that we can take this message across to the rest of the country. If you're interested, please look at our contact points below and don't hesitate to call. We'll be very happy to welcome you. Thank you. Hello, everyone. Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar. We are very fortunate to be here with you to talk about this very important subject, why communities are important in protecting green spaces. We will hope to explore the issue of balance of development against protection of green spaces, and also look at the communities involved in advocating protection and see why your voice really does matter. If I may take you then to the next slide here, we are basically looking at a whole series of events which have been organized jointly between Friends of Bukit Kera and Think City Institute. And I do hope that you will look at the chat box. There is a calendar there. And in the bottom left corner, you can see a link to join these various activities. So please do that and join us during the week so that we can explore some of these very interesting issues during this Earth Week. If I may start here, before I just invite the speakers, I'd just like to share with you a few housekeeping issues. One is that the way we're going to organize this session is that we have two speakers. Peter and Justin will come on and basically provide a 10 to 15 minute talk. After that, we'll open up for Q&A and show to make sure that you get your answers to questions. Please post them in the chat box quickly and early on so that we can take this on board. The other point before I invite Peter to come on board is the first thing is that if there is a problem with your technical issues, there is a restore button and you can restore your inputs. And otherwise, go back and log on if you have to. So without further ado, can I just invite Peter to come on? Peter.
Hi everyone.
Hi Peter. Thanks so much. Peter does of course require no introduction in this space. But anyway, let me say a few words about him. His interest in conservation actually took hold really after retirement. He was involved for 3 decades in the engineering and operational roles in the petroleum industry. He's now presently a committee member both with the Friends of Bukit Kera and also with the Damansara Community Forest Society. He's also a volunteer with Selamat Kolom. Without further ado, can I just hand over the stage to Peter to take on his talk. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Kriban, for the introduction. My job today is to actually, hopefully, well, I guess, set the scene a bit for a bigger deliberation by Justine and, of course, later in the Q&A. On the subject of why communities are important in protecting green lungs, now the part that, the subtopic that I'm presenting is actually the Bukit Kiara gazettement journey and comparative conservation pathways. Now, why comparative conservation pathways? I think for most of Friends of Bukit Kiara's existence, we have been very focused on the subject of gazettement, and I think that's a journey which is finally coming to some kind of closure. But through the last few years of broader engagement with, especially with other green lung CBOs, we have actually started to see things through a broader lens, and alternative conservation pathways are also present that can be complementary and cause us to actually see better value versus just focusing on gazettement alone. So with that, let me take you to my next slide. Setting the scene for what exactly are we conserving for Bukit Kiara. This is, I think, it seems like a no-brainer question, but in reality, we need to think through it a little bit deeper in terms of, what are the events or factors which I think led to there being something to conserve. Because when you look at Bukit Kiara in terms of what it really is, it was actually like any other rubber estate that got absorbed when KL got expanded. And when did KL get expanded? If you look at the map on the right, that's actually the pre-1974 KL. I think if you are a KL resident, you will know that every year, 1st February, you do get a public holiday on the 1st of February. Yeah, and the 1st of February is City Day because in 1972, KL became a city. Federal capital and a city in 1972, but it was a city that was still in Selangor. And if you look at this map, this map is actually quite a legendary map. It's actually worth a webinar in its own right, actually. It's the so-called town planning map of KL of that era. If you look at that red circle there, that's the Lake Gardens. And of course, it was the only major public park in KL at the time. The small KL, I mean the original KL. To the right of that or to the east of that, you see another patch of green. That's actually the Royal Selangor Golf Club. I mean, green, but not exactly public. Yeah. So if we think about it in terms of what Bukit Kiara was, it is actually just one of the components or the building blocks of development that came about after 74 when the federal government took over KL to manage as a federalized city. And in that process, certain things came about, such as, I guess, the grand plan of making Bukit Kiara, among other things, in that expanded city. The city had not much room to grow before 1974. And suddenly in 1974, it grew from 90-odd square kilometers to about 240. So that was a lot of land, and within that peripheral margin is where Bukit Kiara is. I think I'll just skip on to the next slide first because it gives, maybe it's better for me to explain what exactly happened. In expanding the city, there were three major estates, ladangs. Ladang Bukit Kiara, marked with a K. Ladang Hortondon, marked with a H, and Ladang Bukit Jalil, which were actually all government acquired under the Land Acquisition Act for specific purposes, in other words, purposes that were so-called state actor driven. So Kiara obviously had a very specific agenda, but that's not to diminish the important things that were going to be done with the other two as well. For instance, if you look at the one in the northeast, Hortondon, part of it was actually used for expanding the military housing of Kementah, Kementerian Pertahanan actually in short form. And in the south, you see Ladang Bukit Jalil. We know that at the time, Malaysia was thinking forward to its role in hosting high-profile international sports events, hence the National Sports Complex is there. But Bukit Kiara was really the jewel in the crown. It was actually meant for something bigger, which we'll revisit in a bit. But the other thing I'd like to point out as well is that the expansion of the city was not only about government acquisitions, it was also very much a private sector play. Many new townships actually came about through private sector acquisitions. But the difference is this: in a private sector acquisition, the general economics of development is such that the developer will be required to hand over as public purpose lands, maybe only 10% as a rule of thumb. And of that 10%, maybe 5% will end up being green space. But Bukit Kiara was really special. And I think this is where I sort of flip back to the previous slide. Bukit Kiara had a grand plan to be made into a national botanical gardens. The current Taman Persekutuan, as everyone knows it, is actually not National Botanical Gardens. National Botanical Gardens is actually something more like, let's say, FRIM, on a very scientific scale, meant to advance the science of botany and park management. What we have in Taman Persekutuan is not exactly that. The other thing that was created by the government's plan to create the National Botanical Gardens is that, well, first of all, the land was paid for with government money, meaning taxpayer money. So there's an obligation to the tax-paying public, but also to the former landowner, because in acquiring a piece of land, there's always compensation. And former landowner was compensated on the basis that his land is acquired for national interest. Meaning to say that he gets less compensation. Yeah. So in other words, the former landowner is giving up something for the for the greater good. Yeah. So that's another aspect of moral accountability that's created. Yeah. So okay, let me get back on track to where we were. Yeah. One question that sometimes people wonder about is. I mean, there are times when people refer to Kiara as a forest. Physically, of course, it's regenerating into a forest today. But was it a true forest before it was a rubber estate? Definitely it was, physically speaking. But legally speaking, it was never a forest reserve because it was already a rubber estate even before the first laws were drawn up by the Federated Malay States, meaning the British government. That created a so-called structure for declaring forest reserves. So even before such law came about, this was already a rubber estate. But that is not to say that it's not important because it's not a forest reserve. It is still very important. And this importance is not just because it was promised to the public or to the taxpaying public, but because it does very important things for our city. It forms so-called reserve for biodiversity, as a carbon sink for absorbing carbon dioxide. In terms of ecosystem services, as a stormwater buffer, urban wellness, of course, for the thousands of the public who actually use it very much for recreation. And I think one phrase that's used a lot these days is forest bathing. So all this leads up to all the familiar KL structure plan narratives that are seen typically, like Bandaraya Lestari Bertaraf Dunia, a world-class sustainable city. So these are the kinds of things that make it very important. And of course, Justine is going to cover this in probably more competently than I can. And but for the purpose of my presentation, suffice to say that at the time when the government acquired this estate and was making its grand plan, they were being advised by advisors, consultants, who were actually very much at the forefront, at the leading edge of incorporating concepts like this into master planning for urban landscapes. And bearing in mind, this is the pre-internet age. So if you were to try and Google for the kind of leading edge thinking of that point in time, it's a bit hard to find, except in academic papers. But suffice to say, the world leading consultants at that time were actually consulted by our government. And since we are on that subject, I think if you look at the first bullet on this slide, you'll see that gazettement at that time wasn't really even in the narrative, because I think public trust was relatively high at that point in time, that the government was going to do a proper job. The 1982 master plan was actually drawn up by a world-class consultant, American consultant. Today they call themselves RHAA. You can still find them in the with their website and all that. Royston, Hanamoto, Abbey, and Alley. And what they drew up, clearly enshrined or clearly embodied the moral accountability of what the government was supposed to deliver to the taxpayers. Of course, at that time, when I say public trust was high, maybe you could say there wasn't too much of a public yet in places like Taman Tun. The population was only starting to move in. But definitely, new house buyers to a newly developing estate like Taman Tun were fully convinced, that this is what was in the pipeline for them to give them a very high quality of life. But that was in the 80s. I think in the 90s, things changed a bit. As I mentioned just now, Bukit Kiara National Botanical Gardens and all that was very much, a state actor plan. And it was actually not meant to involve too many commercial interests. It was meant, at least half the land was meant for National Botanical Gardens. But what really happened was that the National Botanical Gardens concept got diminished, not only in terms of acreage, but also in terms of its adherence to the master plan. And private interest started coming in terms of a second golf course, which was private rather than public. It was not in the original master plan. And also developments such as housing and private clubs that were also not in the original master plan. So you could say that in the 90s, gazettement was the demand for gazettement rather was the community's knee-jerk response to the threat of loss. And this was manifested by the Taman Tun Residents Association's petition to the Mayor in 1994. That's probably where the gazettement narratives were first born. And about a decade later, by that time in the guise of Friends of Bukit Kiara, the people in the Residents Association had by that time started calling them the Friends of Bukit Kiara, calling themselves the Friends of Bukit Kiara, and had garnered wide support from among residents associations on both sides of the KL and Selangor divide. Many of these 44 residents associations were actually in Petaling Jaya. So this mega petition was actually forwarded to the Prime Minister in 2005, and it was actually the turning point in terms of winning a promise for gazetting the large-scale public park. But what exactly was this gazettement about? I mean, at the end of the day, even though gazettement was demanded by the public, but the idea of what gazettement really is did not gel very completely in the minds of the public. In reality, this is not a forest, and when you say it's to be gazetted as a public park, unfortunately, we don't have the very specific laws to prescribe how a public park is gazetted. What exists is the Section 62 of the National Land Code, which basically just says reservation of land for public purposes. And public purposes can actually be, it's actually the same law that we use for playgrounds, water tanks, sewage treatment plants, and what have you. It's rather general purpose. Yeah. But still important. I mean, I think the important thing was that it gelled the community to work towards a goal and to sustain a narrative that continually applied pressure for conserving Bukit Kiara, as opposed to allowing it to be switched over to development and commercial interests. Yeah. Now, just a quick skim through this, but I think basically from what I mentioned in the last slide, through this entire timeline, I think the one single major, most important constant has been the community, the public. The public sustaining its demand for what has been promised. So of course, the promise sort of got watered down and modified and changed, but ultimately through all these years of chopping and changing, I think what happened was that finally in 2007, the promise was won from federal government to actually turn Bukit Kiara, or at least the remnant 400 odd acres of it, into a large scale public park. Taman Awam Berskala Besar was the words used in that cabinet announcement. I probably need not go through the details of the timeline. I mean, these are available on our website. But maybe one of the key milestones I like to point out was 1991 when a second private golf course opened on Parcel B that you see in the map. I think that probably represented the first, I guess, major corruption of the master plan. That bit was actually meant to be Pusara Negara, basically a national mausoleum, or rather Malaysia's version of the Arlington National Cemetery, where all the national heroes are buried in a park-like setting. So that was thrown out the window, and it became the second golf course, which is today, of course, KLGCC. Yeah. And but anyway, what happened was after all these public demands for, I think, a decade and a half, the promise was won in 2007 that we will get a Taman Awam Berskala Besar. But even from then on, I think it was another quite a long haul, quite a long struggle after that to actually win the first gazettement. 2020, only last year. So now actually this is what we have in terms of gazettement. Like I said, it's a general purpose gazettement under the Section 62 of the National Land Code. If you look at the green outline, that green outline is actually the what has been clearly shown in Plan Warta 568. Plan Warta meaning a gazette plan. It's the plan that the gazette references, and it's an official plan that's kept, or rather prepared and kept safe by the survey department. So what is not in the Warta at the moment is those 3 blocks in orange, because those are commercially encumbered to a private entity, and they only become unencumbered in 2027. So basically those are not yet in the Gazette. So what then needs to happen in 2027 is that a new Gazette plan, a new Plan Warta will need to be prepared that actually encompasses those 3 orange blocks as well. And then finally, we should have our entire 400 acres that is gazetted as Taman Persekutuan Bukit Kiara. Operationally, of course, the entire 400 acres is already part of the Taman Persekutuan Bukit Kiara, operated by Jabatan Landscape Negara. It's just that these 3 parcels could not be gazetted. But at the same time, they also cannot be developed. One of the things I'd like to point out is the very generic nature of those wordings. You can see very simple words. And this is actually the result of there not being a specific law to gazette things like a Taman Awam Berskala Besar or Taman Persekutuan. It's basically just, like I said, you will find a very similar wordings even when we gazette a septic tank or a water tank or a playground. It's pretty much the same words. Not a criticism by any way. I mean, at the end of the day, a gazette is what a public servant, a decision or action that a public servant is empowered or obliged to make at a point in time based on certain processes and within the framework of the law that gives them such powers. And they can only issue that gazette within the framework that they are limited to. I make a brief comparison actually to what the True Forest Gazette looks like. And if you look at that map, I think many of you who are hikers, for example, will definitely recognize that, that characteristic horseshoe shape. That's of course the Kota Damansara Community Forest. Justine is, of course, going to cover that in her presentation after this. If you look at all those squiggly lines there, those are the trails. Those of you who are hikers would have definitely walked on those squiggly lines and know them very well. Yeah. But the thing is, if you look at the forests, for the True Forest, the gazettes, one of the key differences is the thing that I have in the middle, National Forestry Act 1984. Basically, every state would have its forest enactment, which has clearly mapped out what the state has adopted from the Federal Forestry Act in terms of regulations, policies, etc. The states, as everyone knows, has got powers over their own land, so they may not actually adopt the National Forestry Act in entirety, but certainly they have adopted vast chunks of it. And the moment something is gazetted under the state's forestry enactment, it automatically, without exception, everything that the state has already acceded to becomes obligatory. And the other difference is that because the Forestry Act is more specific in terms of addressing issues like biodiversity and ecosystems, it's a more technical law. And therefore, the State Forestry Director, if you see at the bottom there, now this person has got wider powers to actually pass his own gazette, to actually specify things in a more prescriptive manner relating to the usage of that particular forest. So things are always more concrete when it's a forest because the laws are there. In a much more detailed framework than what we have for parks. Yeah. Okay. So yeah, I just had to do this little comparison of what's some of the little pros and cons of a hutan versus taman gazettement.
Peter,
sorry.
maybe you could speed up a little bit.
Oh yeah. Okay. Can So when it's a forest, I mean, it's always whether it's a forest or it's a park, it's always a state matter because even for KL, by the way, because although we think of KL as being a federal city, in reality, it's not really managed by the federal cabinet. It's actually you can say more close power structures surrounding the FT minister. There's probably a lot we can delve into that, but I think since I've been asked to speed up, you can check up on that. Forestry laws provide the framework for biodiversity and ecosystem services protection. That's obvious, so it's always the hutan is always much better protected. Where we see the public being able to make impact is in terms of, I guess, accessibility, because parks have, just by the very nature of being urban, and being covered by bylaws which contemplate an urban user population, they have, you can say, an automatic catchment for us to actually tap a good public following. And all this is already there under the Local Government Act umbrella. Last Dutching that you have there was about public participation. Neither forest nor taman provides very clear public participation mechanisms, but ultimately we hope that the third vote, meaning local government elections, will be the key, but we can't hold our breath for that. And I think most importantly, I think communities need to do what is possible or doable, now within the framework that we have right now. And there are already many strategic and positive things that we can do, even within those limitations, that can put us in a better position for when that last bit comes through, which is local government elections. Friends of Bukit Kera, like every other organization that represents urban green lungs, I think we have our audience of a regular audience of people who come for recreational and exercise purposes, and this is the audience that we try to tap through these programs that you see in this slide. It's programs that we would like to get back to as soon as our COVID-19 MCO allows us to. But the important thing is that these provide us touch points for a visible conservation agenda in terms of getting people interested and people passionate about conserving Green Lung. If you look at our audience, actually, obviously, top right corner, you see that we have a big chunk of our audience from those areas closest to us. But look at the green in the top right corner. That's a full 1/3 of our audience actually comes from rather far away, something like 15 kilometer radius and above. So we also need to think about how we can get this a wider cross-section of KL public or Greater Klang Valley public to actually come in and be involved and ultimately even be our committee members. That's something that we need to slowly work on and build a broader participation. Yeah. So finally, this is my last slide. I'd like to say that Bukit Kiara is really a high-profile outlier. We had a very long learning curve with nothing much to actually fall back on because we were, in a way, a pioneer in campaigning for Green Lung. Yeah. But today, I think we have many more connections right across the Greater Klang Valley with many other communities who are maybe in different circumstances, but working towards similar goals and with many things that we can share and help each other to do better. So I think all these communities helped by CBOs and CSOs, we must speak up, we must seek broader forums and alliances to push for law and policy reforms. And finally, I'd just like to say that gazettement for us, I think now with the benefit of knowing better, gazettement is actually the start of another journey, not the end in itself that maybe initially people thought it was. It's just the start of another journey and probably a more challenging journey than, maybe even a more challenging journey than we had in getting the gazettement. Yeah, so thank you very much. I think that's the end of my presentation. I'll pass it back to Dr. Kriban.
Hey, thanks, Peter, for that very comprehensive view about the wider struggles in Bukit Kiara and the protection which we have achieved. Let me move on to next speaker, Justin. Yes, thanks. Yeah. Justin also needs no introduction. She's very familiar with us in the green space. But at the moment, she's the general manager of Habitat Foundation, which is working to advance biodiversity conservation in Malaysia and in the region. She was, of course, the founding president of Kota Damansara Community Forest Society, and we'll hear a little bit more about that in a short while. And this really is considered a model for public participation in biodiversity conservation. So without further ado, I give you Justin. Please come on board. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Kriban. Okay, so good evening and happy Earth Day, everyone. I usually get invited to these things to tell the story of Kota Damansara Community Forest, which many people find inspiring. And there's a lot about our experience over the past 15, 20 years that is inspiring. KDCF, as we call it, is a model community forest. It has come to represent public participation in the management of public protected areas, in all the values which are enshrined in the Aichi targets and also mentioned in the National Policy on Biodiversity. Now, Kota Damansara Community Forest, which you can see is that little kidney-shaped thing in the top middle of the screen, is the remnant of the much larger Sungai Buloh Forest Reserve, which was first gazetted in 1898. And over the years, it has continued to be reduced in size. What we now have as the Kota Damansara Community Forest is only 320 odd hectares, less than 5% of what the original forest reserve was. And it has continued to make way for the urban sprawl of Petaling Jaya and major highways, including the NKVE, which you can see abuts on the eastern side of the forest. Yet, it continues to be a really important place for people to connect with nature. And this forest, towards the mid-2000s, it became the focus of a heated campaign of local residents and NGOs because this entire forest was slated for clearing for housing. So most of the people had moved to this area and purchased properties expecting to be living next to a green lung, only to find that there were plans in the pipeline to remove the thing that they had moved there for. It was a sustained campaign. It was many, many years of public involvement, but it was finally in 2010 where the forest was gazetted for protection. So the community that championed its protection has gone on to play a central role in supporting the forestry department in co-managing the forest. So today, the forest is an island for people of green, for people who live in Klang Valley and beyond. It's a forest escape from urban life, with its brutal commutes and traffic jams and increasingly cramped urban housing and declining availability of public recreational areas. It's a place to escape the pressures of urban living. And more importantly, it's also free. Access to the forest is available to anyone. It doesn't require a club membership or for you to be in a particular strata of society. What we care most about in Kota Damansara is that this is a socially just space where recreation is available to all. And this is where we have built our community. Kota Damansara Community Forest also is really important because it harbors a remnant of important lowland biodiversity. Within this 300 plus 20 hectares, you can still find over 100 species of birds, herpetofauna. Even recently, we had a record of a dusky langur, which I had been working in this forest for over 10 years and never encountered it, but definitely there's wildlife well concealed in this big expanse of forest. It's really interesting and heartening to learn the story of Friends of Bukit Kiara from Peter and Kriban, because Friends of Bukit Kiara is our older brother. And we have so much in common. And one of the main commonalities is the way that we design and build our trails. This is one of the 8 trails that we have in Kota Damansara. We build around nature to showcase natural features without any removal of trees, making sure that we have sturdy paths to ensure visitor safety and that the impact to the forest is kept to the minimum. This is really our pride. A community managed but highly admired trail network that can assure high visitor traffic without damaging the regenerating forests. This, of course, has been logged over forest. It was last logged in the mid-80s, but it's regenerating well. There are 8 trails totaling about 14 kilometers, which have been built in stages over the past 10 years, mainly by volunteers, some of it with the help of corporate sponsors, and increasingly with the help of My Changkul, which is our brother social enterprise, where we have been able to develop a standard of maintenance with Tumbuhan Orang Asli, who are our partners in this. We've also gone to see My Changkul flower in its approach to involving the communities in the management of national parks. The Kota Damansara style of trail has also been taught at Johor National Parks, Perak State Parks. The sustainable forest trails are a product of basic civil engineering for the tropics. And in addition, we are bringing in the software for community building. By bringing in people to participate in building trails, we are engendering the teamwork and sense of ownership that's really essential to maintaining a community forest. Regular maintenance is provided by the Tumbuhan team with My Changkul. And this has been a way that we've been able to engage and give back to the Orang Asli community that lives in the area. It was a very proud moment when our team also went and built a trail in Langkawi for the Datai. Okay, so Kota Damansara has always felt it absolutely vital that we continue to engage the community through education programs, through CSR activities as we build our corporate community of sponsors. The reason why we've done this is because we do feel that a large membership would continue to be important should the forest ever come under threat once more. Okay, so I think in my tenure as the president, the success of the forest, we felt that we had a duty to show that working with communities was to the advantage of any organization, right? We felt that we wanted to demonstrate that how much energy, commitment, funding, and long-term support that we could give to the forests. Our hope was that the government would also begin to see this a system as something that they would then use to engage other forest areas that needed protection. As Klang Valley and Greater KL continued to grow, we really wanted to see our model begin to be sown across the landscape. Now, this unfortunately really hasn't taken shape the way that we'd hoped, to be honest. The title of this talk is Why Communities Are Important in Protecting Urban Green Spaces. And I would say it's a fair statement that KDCF, FOBK, FOBG, we are all in a much better place because of the community advocacy sustained over decades by the people that are working in these areas. And we hope, and God willing, that communities that continue to strive, Shah Alam Community Forest, Ampang Jaya, Kuala Langat Forest Reserve will also benefit. But this is increasingly uncertain in this day and age. So I would have to say that taken as a whole, and I dare say I speak on behalf of all the communities in our sister network of green lung organizations, that protecting urban green spaces is something that we have all been drawn into, not because we are excessively interested in this, but because the circumstances have demanded our participation. And in truth, I think all communities well, we would much rather prefer not to have been in this position at all. What am I saying here? I think by far a much better alternative in terms of the protection and management of urban green spaces is for the relevant government agencies at state, federal level, municipal level, those that are trained and entrusted with urban planning, water catchment protection, the correct ratios of green versus built up in keeping with international norms, equal access to free recreational space for all, the protection of biodiversity, all those that are entrusted to this role, who are trained to do so and empowered to do so, are responsible for the protection of urban green spaces. So although we're celebrating the role the community has played in pertaining the green areas that we continue to exist in Greater KL and the Klang Valley, in all things considered, it's not the most efficient way to conserve nature in these circumstances. So take a moment to look at these pictures, all right? Currently, we have to contend with the fact that all the current science suggests that greenery in urban scale is now increasingly important in our battle that we're coming and facing now against climate change, right? So it's not a must-have, nice to have anymore. We are knowing that green areas are going to be very important in order to help to mitigate the challenges are up ahead, right? So if you look at this study from Think City, which I think will be covered in one of the future talks by Sophia, is providing hard evidence of the fact that those urban areas that have cut down their green areas in order for expanding urban sprawl or industrial areas are experiencing significant variations in temperature. In Johor Bahru, as much as 6.7 degrees Celsius over 13 years. Bayan Lepas, and a 5.6 degree in temperature by the heat maps in this period of time. Kuala Lumpur, surprisingly, has fared quite well, and that is to a large extent qualified by the existence of green areas that continue. But how long for, right? The idea, we actually have to face the science that we're going to be facing. Okay, this is only just to say that all of the latest documents from UN Habitat and so on highlight very prominently the importance of conserving green spaces and also in working with stakeholders, right? So I think that communities by and large want to be consulted with. We want to have a say in good decisions and programs, but we are not the ultimate kaipochis, right? We pay taxes and we lead busy lives. We only mostly step in when there is a gap and when we notice with alarm that something is not right. In fact, something is going horribly wrong. That's when communities tend to get involved. And if the system is not working, if we have a dysfunctional system, then communities have to get involved. But much better for us to be planning these things in a more coordinated manner, right? So I'm just going to say this last bit before we go towards some discussion. All right. Okay. So I think I wanted to pull something out from this slide. The action plans of international guides on urban development place considerable emphasis on stakeholder participation and conservation. It even says conserve natural areas and assets, providing critical ecosystem services through land management and land use planning. These are good plans and communities agree wholeheartedly. And yet knowing this, areas that are so fundamentally important for climate adaptation, biodiversity, conservation, human sanity and well-being, culture and heritage conservation, these green areas continue to be slated for clearing. So our sister forest in Shah Alam Community Forest faces death by 1,000 cuts for unnecessary roads and, ironically, a cemetery. Despite years of doing all the right things, demonstrating biodiversity significance, filing appeals, attending the relevant hearings and advocation, and continuing to advocate for the forest, they continue to not have much progress in this area. Representatives from Shah Alam Community Forest are in this discussion, and hopefully they will be able to feed back into the chat and provide links to where you can find out more about their work. There's also been recent podcasts and newspaper articles. Over in Ampang, right? This is, I think, the recent hearing that the community forest people have had to attend. Unclear as to the resolution from that meeting. Okay, over in Ampang, where we have some of the spectacular landscapes and geological marvels, this area is also critical for water catchment. Much of it occurs in the Selangor State Park and the buffer areas that are classified as environmental sensitive areas. Yet development proposals continue to emerge in the local area plan for this area, which is meant to be set aside. So local residents have taken upon themselves to become experts in the local laws, and they've also engaged themselves in the task of community building, beginning to build networks across different residential neighborhoods in the expectation that they will continue to have to fight for this area to protect it. And representatives from Ampang Jaya area are also here if you would like to ask them questions, and also follow the link to their website. They have just launched an exciting campaign providing information in Bahasa Malaysia, targeting all different age groups about what people's rights are under the law to comment on things. So where do we stand now, right? I think these are the things which I have come to realize over the past decade plus working in this space. The vast majority of Malaysians and urban dwellers understand and value forests. They expect planners with the relevant expertise to retain valuable areas, particularly as these are important for nature-based adaptation to climate change. The preservation of urban green spaces should unite us all. If our goal is to preserve nature in cities, then we should get busy doing precisely that. More focus should be on finding solutions to achieve this, as opposed to repeating reasons why nothing can be done. We, by which I mean all of us, need a high-level plan to identify those that still exist, which areas that are still green and are available to be protected, and those corridors and buffers that could be restored easily. There should also be strategies for taking into consideration reserve land, private land, and parks and gardens, and generating the incentives that need to be created for retaining those areas that are still under natural cover. It's important for us to remember that we are all supposed to be playing for the same team, right? The role, I sometimes wonder whether we sometimes we have a romantic idea of about communities fighting for urban green spaces. This is not a game of survivor or outlasting and outwitting. If we lose our green green spaces, we all lose. And this is something that those who have the responsibility need to take them into consideration. Right, a supportive community is always an asset. There's no buts about it. It's totally true, right? And we are in a situation where there are many communities that are willing to play a supportive role. But it's not a fair or reasonable expectation for this heavy burden to lie on communities alone. We need leadership from our government and professionals who work in the urban planning space. And we need, and these people are properly equipped with the processes, resources, and personnel to achieve this outcome for the good of our entire urban population. No doubt that the situation currently, changes have been happening that have to be adapted to, but we should start focusing on the solutions and stop working against each other. So this slide that you're seeing, which is my last slide before we can get into some discussion, is something that we've come up through this initiative where the Kota Damansara Community Forest has applied to the Global Environmental Facilities Small Grants Program for funding for capacity building among all the community-based organizations. It was a big, long, fancy name, so we decided to shorten it, and it became Kota Hijau Kita. Kota Hijau Kita is everybody's aspiration for a green urban landscape in KL and Petaling Jaya and Selangor. All right, people who, it is where we hope to channel all our collective resources, experience, and opportunities for all the groups working, and on those working on forest protection, as well as those actually starting to pioneer new areas of urban biodiversity protection, rewilding, biodiversity gardening, food self-sufficiency. All can find their resources here. We're at an early stage, but it's something that we can get started with. This movement embodies our collective aspirations for the future. We believe that we all have a responsibility to protect nature for present and future generations. We are committed to working together towards ensuring that Malaysian cities are vibrant, alive, and green. Okay, so thank you very much. That is, in a nutshell, my musings on the situation regarding urban green spaces. Thank you, Kriban.
Thank you, Justin, for that very comprehensive view of your KDCF experience and the many other community actions which are going on in the Klang Valley. I think that's fantastic. Let's move on very quickly to the question and answer. Can I just invite Peter back onto the stage, please, Peter? Peter.
Yep, I'm back. Hi.
Okay, good. Thanks.
Hi.
Right. Okay. Let me start the ball rolling with the questions because we don't have very much time. One of the questions we've had here, and I'm just reading this from Mr. Tan Cheng Ian. He says he's asking whether is it possible in KL to create green connectors across the city in a way that Singapore has been doing. To both speakers, yeah. Maybe Justin, you could start, maybe.
I don't know KL so well, but I think what Singapore has done is definitely something that we should definitely look into. We do have areas which are set aside for drains and power lines and so on, and it's a natural thing to do to try to create those connectors. In situations where we have our large blocks of forests which are all isolated and fragmented, everyone has a role in building these stepping stones in the landscape, right? So stepping stones are fun because it could be urban parks, it could be reserves and connectors. It could also be everybody's backyard, right? If we can get with the same program. But the idea of connecting up, I think is something exciting because it can involve people in the spaces in which they live, right? That they have control over. Okay.
Right. Thanks, Justin. Peter, any thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, if we were to just look around at what is already happening in KL, I think one obvious thing that's happening is the River of Life. I mean, people are, of course, quite familiar with it in the city center, but really the concept of the River of Life as a biodiversity connector can actually be extended to practically the whole of KL because, KL extends to the whole Klang River system, which has got, many tributaries. So if this concept is actually carried through to its logical completion, definitely we already have a very good system of connectors. among other possibilities that will arise after that.
Thanks, Peter. I think that's quite interesting. Another question here from Karen, for both speakers again. It says here, examples presented so far have been very urban English skewed. Is there a way to make the protection of urban green lungs more inclusive? Interesting one.
Yeah.
Peter, you want to start?
Yeah, I think I'll have a go at that. I think it's a very good one, and it's something that's always been on my mind for years, actually. I think we need to start by getting more vernacular speakers into what we are doing now. I mean, if we probably take a poll among the majority of us here on this call, probably we will find that there's a majority of Western educated English speakers. You know, we need to actually start to find some real leaders, who are more familiar in the vernacular, and to see what we can do to actually engage communities that maybe think a little bit differently from our crowd. I know it's something that's a bit, maybe a bit hard to catalyze at the beginning, but I think once we are on a roll, I think we will make progress.
Yeah. Indeed. Justin?
I think that things are quite different in Kota Damansara. This is a very it is quite a diverse network. We definitely have a large union, and that's fine. They may not have so much time to get involved in the running of the committee, but certainly there's a huge support base there. There are more proactive steps could be taken in terms of reaching out to some of the neighborhoods that have not experienced that. I think from time to time, we certainly do that. And that's the future of the community for us, is very, very close relationship with our surrounding neighborhood. Yeah. But what I will highlight the fact that what appears to be an ongoing challenge is not really, it's more an age thing. We need to ensure our organizations, with a healthy infusion of young blood, we need to start working on the next generation and making spaces for the next generation who will have to take the reins when all of us start to bow out.
Right.
Okay.
Hey, thanks for that. Maybe one last question. Both of you are obviously very involved with the community, but if you were to, maybe starting with you, Justin, if you were to give one, choose one critical factor in the campaign to protect Kota Damansara, which really made the difference, what would you say that was?
Okay. Well, we talked about this during our run through, right? And to many reasons, if you think about it, is a sheer constellation of serendipitous things that happened in Kota Damansara that allowed that forest to be protected. If I think about it, I could mention the availability of the NGOs, characters like Tan Sri Saleh, who played such a key role in making sure that everyone knew how important that forest was historically in Fort Biodiversity. I could reference the media, the role the media played, and so on. The beginnings of the trails, the recreational groups, and a whole slew of people who cannot be named now, who played a key role. But the thing that really made the difference, and everybody lean in, this is very important. It was the election, all right? That the green area, the campaign for the green area in Kota Damansara became an election issue. Constituents basically demanded it, right? We demanded it. We wanted to know whomever was standing for election, what their position was if they were to be elected. And in order to conserve Kota Damansara forest, we literally changed the government. I mean, so many people were involved. It took that election and the change of government and a conscientious member of parliament who came in and subsequently was the Environment Exco to fulfill the election promise. And so if that hadn't happened, I really don't know what the situation would have been. Now, at some point in the future, we will have elections in Malaysia. And I think it's really important that people's representatives, or those people who aspire to represent people, start to develop a track record of standing up for urban green spaces and natural areas in the city, because we won't be just listening to what your campaign promise is. We will, and we should start demanding more actively. We'll be looking to see what your track record is on these particular issues, which are so critical for our community.
Thank you, Justin.
Okay, that's me. Yeah.
Thank you. That's great. You know what? We are running quickly out of time. Maybe what I'd like to just maybe invite both of you to say, if you have any final thoughts, just be short and quick, because we really need to move on. Thanks, Peter. Maybe you can say a few your final words.
Yeah, I think there was a couple of questions or two that came in. May I try and sort of?
I don't know whether we have time actually.
Okay, yeah. Anyway, I think at the end of the day, it's really the people pulling together. I think that's what matters. At the end of the day, if communities need to understand that they do have power in their hands, as Justine said, as a voting bloc. And if we look at, for instance, Bukit Kiara, we know that in 2027 we are supposed to actually get the next round of gazettement, right? And actually ensuring that we get this next round of gazettement is actually not really in using platforms like change.org or e-petitions and all that. It's about the community actually showing up in things like, let's say, the KL structure plan or the KL local plan, focus group discussions, public hearings, that sort of thing. And also making its presence felt in all areas in which involves local government and public service agencies. If the community is there doing something that pushes for a better performance from local government, I think that would make the biggest difference, because it shows that the community is present.
Thanks, Peter. Justin?
I think that's all. I think the only thing that I would say is that the most important thing right now for me is to say thank you to everybody, hundreds of people who have contributed over the years, because all of these people are the kinds of people that didn't say someone else will do it. And that's made all the difference.
Sure. Thanks, Justin. Well, thank you, guys. You can get off the platform now, and then I'll
thank you.
Thanks so much.
Bye.
Great session. Thank you. Let me just move on very quickly to finish off. Just to remind you that we actually have a webinar tomorrow at 11 a.m. 23rd. So please sign on. Very interesting subject is sustainable fashion more resilient. This is looking at thriving in the challenging times, weathering pandemics and preparing for future crises. So it will be a very interesting session indeed. You've already seen the overall plan for the week. So again, there is the connection points there. Please join up and join us in the rest of the events for the coming week. We were very fortunate that one of our corporates, Tenaga Nasional, was willing to sponsor some of this work we have been doing here over the last week, and we'd just like to recognize Tenaga Nasional for that. If I can move on, just to finish off, we have been quite fortunate that Justin has been involved with us, and she works for Habitat in Penang Hill, and she's offering us, a 30% discount for a visit to this facility. I just thought I'd just give you a very quick introduction to what this is. Habitat Penang Hill is basically an iconic hilltop park at the edge of a very pristine rainforest in Penang Hill. Once you're up there, you will basically enjoy the forest itself, and then you have this amazing, breathtaking views of the whole Penang Island. I think it's a real worthwhile visit. More importantly, Habitat Penang Hill has a Habitat Foundation, and whatever funds are raised, actually goes towards conserving biodiversity in Malaysia and beyond. So do join. You will see that in the next slide, there is actually this 30% discount for you to download. It should be in the chat box. Do download it and keep it with you. And the next time you're in Penang, please take the opportunity to go and actually visit the park. I will leave you very shortly. Thank you all for joining us in this session. I think it was very insightful incisive. There are a lot of very interesting ideas about the community, and I hope you take away the experience. And if you are involved in some issues in your community, do make sure you are also getting involved and making the difference. I will end here with a video, a short video from Habitat Penang Hill, and thank you again. Bye.